Hi everyone, thanks for watching this video. If you like what I'm doing, give it a like and subscribe to my channel, it'd be really appreciated. So today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about brushes, we're going to talk about water and paint, so real basics. And the first bit about the paint is, okay, we're going to be using a dry palette, not a wet palette. And the reason is that with a wet palette, the paint continues to draw moisture. So when you're learning about consistency, it can be quite confusing because the wet palette will keep drawing moisture. It can be quite tricky to get the right consistencies that you want until you've kind of adapted to using a wet palette. Also, there are certain paints that just don't work on a wet palette. We're not going to be using those today, but stuff like some of the metallics and things like that, they kind of just go too watery and the pigment goes all over the place. The particles of metallic paint go all over the place. Anyway, first thing is I've got this little piece of plastic card. I use it as a dry palette. You can see the paint that was on there. I've just primed over it. I've primed a little bit grey, a little bit black. This is scale 75 primer, black and grey. Shot through my airbrush. You don't need an airbrush, you can just use a rattle can. Use whatever primer you've got, really. With the rattle can, tips for priming, is make sure the temperature is pretty moderate, the humidity is pretty moderate as well. That's one tip. The other one is that keep your rattle cans at kind of a nice room temperature, if possible. Too hot, the pressure gets a little bit odd. Too cold, it gets a bit lumpy. Also, a nice tip for what you can remember with a rattle can is you can take the nozzle off and clean the nozzle in between. Clean it with a little bit of solvent, or mild solvent, or even just water. Let it dry out. It'll stop getting nozzle clogs. But you can get a really nice finish with it. I just use an airbrush because I've got one, fortunately, and you get consistent finishes and consistent things. I've not particularly primed these well, I've just really shot over them. So yeah, we're just going to be using this and having a look at paint, but first we need to have a look at brushes. Okay, so these I use Element Games Regiment. Reason is I think they're economical. I think they're fairly good brushes. These are equivalent to kind of a size 2 Winsor Newton or something like that. Stuff by brushes, Artis Opus, Broken Sword are better, and they're better for one reason: they hold moisture in the brushes between painting a little better. They stay moist. These, you can see, are a little drawn out. Now these two are both Regiment brushes, however these are two very different brushes. You can see the bottom one is a little bit worn down, and the reason why it's very worn down actually is because of the style of painting I was doing with it, and I save it for doing that style of painting and probably wear down until I get a new one. The top one's roughly the same age brush actually. It's but you can see it's got a nicer longer point on it and everything, and that's because I use that for fine lines and particular style of painting, which I'll show you in a moment. Okay, the first thing you want to do is, you can see those brush tips are quite dry. When you get certain brushes, they're very, very dry. You should never use a brush in paint straight out when you've just bought it. You should always hydrate your brush. Okay, so what that means is the brush is going to draw up water from the tip up into the well. The well being this bit here, the thickest part where it holds. It's like a reservoir. Okay, that's interesting to keep in mind about the well and it being a reservoir, and the brush sucks it up, basically sucks up that moisture. So we're going to hydrate first. When you're using water, be careful, be gentle with your brushes. No mad actions like this, in the water. You don't need to. So we want to hydrate the brush I'm just going to hydrate the one down brush first, right? Just stick the end in and let it draw up. Get a little bit of the excess off, yeah? Get a little bit of the excess off on the side, keep going, yeah? Let it suck that off. Let it suck it all up, yeah? Hydrate your brush. Okay, before you even put paint in it. Now for the first bit, I'm actually just going to use water. Okay, I'll just move that water aside. I'm just going to use water. So I've got my brush and it's you know, just starting to get hydrated. What you find with the Element Games brushes is that you have to go a few times with hydrating them, because like I say, I don't think they hold moisture as well as maybe an Artis Opus or a Broken Toad in particular. So the reason why this is blunt down, I'll just talk about a painting style. There's a way of painting that's very, very popular. A lot of the big name people you'll have seen use it, and they'll use a wet palette and they will have this kind of motion, and they're building up very, very thin layers, you know, as they're layering or whatever. And it's very quick and it's very free and easy, yeah, and it's fantastic. And obviously the results are fantastic because you've seen people paint like this and how they paint, but it is a style of painting. Okay, you can see it's a bit worn down because the tip, ooh, got a hair on there, so the tip is a little bit broader there. Lost a bit of the point. Okay, that's because we've been going like this, yeah, we've been kind of these sorts of motions with it, you know, maybe putting wet blends in, yeah. Okay, if I just hydrate the other one with the tip on it, you'll see the difference in a second when I paint some lines. You're just going to get that hydrated. Okay, so the points there, yeah. Okay, so one thing to do is actually, when you're thinking about painting, is actually just paint with water, yeah. This is very matte, this primer, so as you can see, it's it shows up the watermarks and the, you know, but just paint with water. And a nice thing to do, I'm just going to move this slightly this way because it's then in line with the way that I'm painting, because you can move a model to paint. And there's an exercise, okay, so if for starters, I don't care how you hold your brush, yeah, but there is a weight point to it. Just find something comfortable. One thing to know is if you're further down here, you'll only be able to draw small marks, yeah. If you're up here, you'll be able to go with longer ones, yeah. So that's something to bear in mind. Adjust while you're painting for whatever it is you're painting. Okay, so one exercise is, if you put more pressure on that brush, it's going to produce a thick line, yeah. If you then rotate, you can draw a thin line. Isn't that cool? I was applying roughly the same amount of pressure, or a little bit less for the thin line, obviously, but when you do a thick line, you flatten the brush out. When you rotate 90 degrees, you're using the point, okay. It's like as if you had a sword and you marked it along the ground, but then you turned it on its sharp sides, yeah, and then cut, okay. Or a knife or whatever, but most people are into fancy stuff like swords and everything. Right, so an exercise you can do that helps you kind of get in the groove of, you're going to be drawing a lot of lines, yeah, is one thick, one thin, one thick, one thin, one thick, one thin, one thick, one thin. Because one thing about model painting is that we all want to paint the model and have our models painted, and we want them painted as quick, you know, for a lot of people, we want them painted as quick as possible, you know, it might be gaming or something like that. But if we're just enjoying painting the model, we're not too concerned with that. However, we kind of dive straight into a model before, I know I did, before you just want to paint the model. So you get your paints and you get your model and you prime them up, and you know, maybe the prime's not so great because it was the first time you're doing it and you're not so sure, but you don't care because you're just going to put some paint on a model, and that's fantastic. Great, get some paint on a model. More people painting, the better, right? If we want to improve that, then actually, you know, most things in life, we practice the individual things first, you know, and just water and a brush and kind of one thick, one thin, one thick, one thin, and then maybe we do an arc. Yeah, it helps us understand how the brush works, how the paint works. Okay, so you can start to think, if you were watching that video then, and why I call this video watching paint dry, did you see that huge puddle? And that was from right at the beginning, using the stubby brush and going for it. I've not put more water in the brush than the other one, okay? But remember me saying about the well? That's starting to split that brush now. Remember me saying about the well? Well, a well holds water, so they'll hold the exact same amount, but if you paint in this style, it stays a lot like a puddle and wetter longer. It takes longer to dry because you've concentrated more paint. It will be. You've concentrated more water into one place, which is great for stuff like wet blending and everything, but it's going to take longer to dry depending on where you live in the world or how much your heating bill is. When I do a thin line, okay, and a line like that, it's going to take a lot less time to dry. Yeah, so that helps when we're thinking about speed, maybe. Yeah, because a lot of people want to increase the speed and keep their quality and things like that. So if I'm piling a load of paint into one place, it's going to take longer to dry unless I get a hairdryer out. Yeah, which you can do, that's fine, but that's already dried that line already because I didn't put as much on in the first place. So what's all that? So what, primer, yeah, so we've been working on black and you can see that, right? Now I've had trouble with lights and things like that. You're not going to be able to see the water, I don't think, on the grey. There you go. Yeah, now most people are going to prime in black when you first start a model, and for the majority of stuff, black, absolutely fine. Yeah, it's good. It's a good base coat. Some of the primers are a little shiny, so under a light they show you where highlights go or where higher points go. That's fantastic. Grey. So what you got to remember is that you're going to be thinning down your paints to whatever degree, and they'll have a certain transparency, and when you paint, you're going to see the primer through. Although you've painted over it, it's going to come through, and so stuff on a black primer is going to look darker. Stuff on a grey primer is going to look lighter, and we can use that to our advantage. Say we're painting white, we really want to try and paint prime the bits we're painting white in a grey primer to start with. You know, this grey, pretty much, you know, it's almost white, so you wouldn't need, you'd only need like one coat really if you wanted it pure white. In most cases, you know, I'd prime grey, I might put an even lighter grey on top, and then I'll just highlight in the extreme white. That's a very common one when you're doing a lot of white scars and things like that. But you can also use it to your advantage to the types of effects we get. And now hopefully this will show up. It is quite hard on camera, and I don't have any fantastic equipment. I just have my iPhone on a little rig thing that sits over, and I've got all sorts of lights going on here. I haven't got a proper, you know, I've got light in terms of for painting models, but for video, that was quite good there. Okay, it's getting a bit shiny even though that's matte. The water's showing up shiny. So what we're going to do, this is Macragge Blue. I've actually got Calgar Blue and Fenrisian Grey, and we could have white, yeah. And if anyone's, you know, into the Space Marines, they'll know that that's an Ultramarine recipe. Yeah, it's a bog standard basic recipe, yeah. So I'm just going to get a bit of paint. And what, oh, before that I'll talk about paint. So GW do base has got more pigment in it, so it is good for base coating. They then do layers and they do other stuff as well. Okay, Vallejo do opaque, what they call heavy opaque or extra opaque, I think it's called. Here's one, Game Color Extra Opaque. So they tell you exactly this is going to have less transparency. So how's all this fitting and everything? I'm just going to get a bit of paint on my palette. There we go. Right, is that completely unthinned? Well, it isn't actually, because there's water in my brush from that well, and when I get it out and I just mix, yeah, these already were starting to thin the paint. Okay, so I want to base coat something. I've got to find a nice consistency, okay, where we cover. So here we go about speed again. I just went too thin on there because I was talking and trying to. Where we cover, but we're not too, that's too much paint. We're not too thin, yeah. So I'm on a dry palette, remember. But because my dry palette is the same primer that's on my model, I can see what it's going to look like. Okay. Now that's got to dry. Now remember, the black's going to come through, and we can use that to our advantage. So if we wanted one that was some crevices, yeah, we might only base coat that one stroke at that consistency. But if we wanted it stronger in a place, we might build up a couple of layers or whatever. But if we're looking at speed, yeah, we want to keep the paint as thin as we can without losing coverage, if you know what I mean, when we're base coating. I'll just do some more there. So that's gone too thin now, because I dipped my paint, I cleaned my brush, so I still had water in my brush. So I've still got water in my brush, remember. So do I need to be adding more water if I've got water in my brush? Okay, so that's going to dry. We keep it thin enough that it dries quick enough for us, or we just get a hairdryer out. Yeah, now a hairdryer might be fine on plastic models. You've got to wait for it to cool as well, because remember, if you've hairdried something and it warms up, then you go to put paint on it again, it could warm as soon as it could dry as soon as you hit, and you could end up with some slight clogs. But also you could use that to your advantage if you're doing glazing and things like that. And on plastic models, certainly GW, it's perfectly fine to use a moderate heat from a little bit of a distance hairdryer or whatever. But on resin models, sometimes some types of resin, things like that, you could melt the model and you'll end up with bendy bits. So I still think I made that mix too thin. Yeah, but my tip here is, if I'm going to put it on the model, I'm going to check my consistency before I put it on the model. And then you get a feel for what your consistency is now. If that was on a wet palette, this is drying, this is starting to dry, which means I can just control a little bit. I can put a little bit more water in there. Yeah. Remember, on a dry palette, it's drying, whereas on a wet palette, it's getting more moist the longer it's there. It's drawing water up. Which one's easier to control? Well, that comes down to you and you know, the experience. If you want to build loads and loads of thin layers up, a wet palette's probably the way to go. Yeah. If you but you can do it on a dry palette, no problem. You know, I never used a wet palette until sort of a year ago. So that's drying up nicely there. Now we're getting into, so that has the black background. Let's have a look at it on grey and whether this will actually show up how I'm seeing it. Okay, that's the same consistency. There you go. So it looks powdery. It looks, because it's the grey showing through. Yeah, I think we can see that. Yeah. Now that's different to that. Now, if I was putting it on ultramarine, obviously I'm unlikely to prime grade. It means I'd have to put more layers on there. That's the same consistency as this. They're both the same consistency. The grey is showing through. However, if I was to paint a Viking shield, yeah, the grey primer gives me almost like a pastel blue. So these are still drying. We're watching paint dry. Yeah. In the warmer months, this would be dry, or if it was warmer in my room, it would be dry. But that helps you think about your consistency a little bit more. So after all my rambling, let's have a look at, so you can see that you can start to see the difference as they both dry up. You'll start to see the difference, and we'll just keep an eye on those in a second. There's a bit here that's dry. Okay, so that is dry. You can see the colour, the nice base colour there. But it's nice, and it's still got some of that primer showing through if I wanted it. Now, the issue is it how solid you want this Macragge blue. Because like I say, you can use that transparency in a particular model. So I might leave that there. Okay. I'm being very wasteful with paint, unfortunately. That's something else, that when you've been using a wet palette, you don't get very wasteful with paint, because it just sits there and it's always fresh. So what you learn with the dry palette is to be more economical with your paint. Okay, now if I was to strengthen that up, I'm really going for it. It's very uneconomical. Okay, so that's going to dry, and we'll keep an eye on those two bits. Yeah. But what I wanted to show you was, so if you were wanting something a bit of a not as strong a Macragge, then you wouldn't have to put as many. You use the opacity. Yeah. Get my other brush, the one that's actually got a point. You use the opacity to create a transition, almost a blend. Yeah, that's layer blending. Okay, where you increase the layers on top to get it stronger and to lighter, or whatever's coming through in the background. Yeah, this is like a mute blacky blue. There we go. And you'll see that's stronger, that's now lighter, because well, it's not actually lighter, it's the black coming through, so it's not as strong. That's a principle to really keep in mind. And when we're trying to do speed, we can use that, because there will be areas of the model where I don't have to go over it loads, because actually I want it a little deeper there, you know, maybe a bit lower down on the shoulder pad of a ultramarine. Yeah, you want a nice little fade. Well, you could get a little bit of a fade there going, couldn't you? Now, coming to highlights. Do you remember me thick, thin practice? I'm going to show you where, this is Calgar Blue. I'm going to show you, I just put a drop of water, yeah? And what I'll do is just leave that there like that. Let my brush soak it up. And check that consistency. Now, you see the consistency, it kind of fades. It's not so strong. Calgar Blue is notorious, especially on black, because it's quite a powdery looking colour. If you put it on grey, yeah, you see as it starts to, I haven't got much in the well there. So we can get it to that means that my paint's a little thick. It's stronger there. Okay, actually Calgar Blue shows up a lot better, stronger on grey, funnily enough. But coming back to this, can you see where I went over there? I've got that stronger, and you've almost got a fade. Okay, so you can use the number of times that you can have the same consistency, yeah, but the number of times you go over gives you a stronger colour there. Or you can increase consistency to get a strong colour. Now, if I want a nice first highlight, remember thick, thin? Well, it comes in, just adding more water to that actually. So it comes in when, say, first highlight, second highlight. Now that's an extreme example, the thick and thin, yeah? But it means you can alternate between those two. Now, what I'm going to do is put a first highlight in. Now, the first highlight I want not to be so strong. It's not an edge highlight. So therefore, my consistency needs to show through the background. It needs to show through the Calgar. Look, I've got a bit of Calgar there. That's okay. It shows through a little bit of the Calgar. It's not so strong, so you get that kind of fade, a little bit of fade that we were talking about. So if I put that in as a first highlight, it's a little bit strong at the top, yeah? However, that already, if I wanted to make that smooth, then what I could do is water down some Macragge again and just go over where the join meets, yeah? But let's say on a Space Marine shoulder pad or whatever, there's your one highlight. Now, if you get your consistencies right, you're putting in highlights for fun, eh? And they're all pretty much the same. We can go back and tweak, yeah? So you could go around putting in all your first highlights. That's fading off a bit now, but the idea is that, yeah? The idea is I can go around. Oh, am I using rubbish brush? Oh, no, I'm not. One smooth action. One, two, three, 4, So when you're talking about increasing your speed, you want to be doing the least amount of marks, least amount of paint brush strokes, essentially. So consistency is really key. So where there, I kind of not got my consistency right, where I wanted it a little bit stronger there or something. So I'd have to go over it again. That's time. We don't want to be having to go over it. So getting the consistency, learning about your consistency in the first place. So as you can see, on this one, it's dried now. And it's quite nice for a little first highlight there. Yeah. And this is basic. This is, you know, this is just a basic paint job. I'm not glazing to get a nice smooth transition. A glaze, by the way, is just watered down paint. You can buy specific glazes that I think got flow improver in them, but you don't really need them. What I would do here, if I wanted this transition to be smoother, yeah, in fact, let's do it. I wanted that transition to be smoother. What I would do is I'd get some Macragge and water the hell out of it. Yeah? What the hell is a real scientific term. And where the two meet, there and there, yeah? Where the two meet, straight down that line. Just into and that will give a smoother transition. Okay, you could keep working the glaze to get a really nice fade, but I put that Calgar on quite strong. Now I've just got Fenrisian because I want to put an edge highlight down. So remember, you could mix Fenrisian with Calgar and do an extra stage. That's all the difference is. The only difference between having really nice blends, yeah, is how much time you put into the stages, so the glazing as well. And you can see now that that's bringing the Calgar down to a bit of a smoother blend, or a bit of a smoother highlight. This is Fenrisian, and we're going to do an edge highlight. Now, how strong you want your highlight, thickness of the paint, but don't go too thick, otherwise you won't get. Remember, we want to try and achieve highlights, or anything we're doing, with the least amount of brush strokes. Yeah, I like that consistency now. So, and I've got to go from there to there. Okay. Can hardly see that one. The Fenrisian really makes it. I'm just going to strengthen. The Fenrisian really makes when you bang a highlight on. Yeah, so your Calgar is a little bit thicker. You'll see if you zoom in on GW's websites, on the pictures and stuff, you'll be able to see the two highlights. They make very distinct highlights because they show you how they're painting it. In GW as well, they always do the edge highlight everything. That shows up every detail on the model. It looks really good on a gaming table. They don't blend as such. They layer, yeah, and like we're doing here, blend. So this is very standard to GW stuff, that, you know, that's what, and what makes it look really good is their paint consistency. Some of the top GW painters, like that I've seen, their paint consistency for the highlights is brilliant. They'll do a nice base coat, but it's the paint consistency for the highlights. I didn't want Fenrisian grey. Okay, so let's go again. Here's Calgar being very wasteful with paint, unfortunately. The paint bill's going to be large. Okay, so on here, The reason this stands out as well is because this base coat was a little bit, wasn't as strong, but you can you see where it's stronger? Where we put that second one on, you could say we go in the two thin coats, which everybody seems to do, which is correct. But I might only need one thin coat, depending on what look I'm going for. I might need 3 thin coats if I want this blue even stronger. There's a limit to how strong it will get. Okay. So let me have a look at the Calgar. The tip being, check your consistency before. Calgar is notoriously a poor flow paint. So I'm on the stronger bit. I'm checking my consistency before, and I can see where it's gone from the black. There, yeah. So I check my consistency and I put my first highlight down, right down the middle. Yeah. Then I come to my Fenrisian, check the consistency, and I've got to ask myself, do I want it strong or just highlighting that Calgar? If I want it just highlight, Calgar and Fenrisian Grey work really well together. It just bangs, it just pops when you bang the Fenrisian in. And remember, the Fenrisian is thinner. Yeah, so your Calgar is your thick, but it's not that thick. Okay. Your Fenrisian is your thin in the middle. Just let that dry. Your Fenrisian is your thin. Now, this applies to my best tip for any starting painter. Yeah, is play with stuff. I'm fine. 3 paints. Yeah. A mid, a deep, a high. You could add white. Like I say, I could add stages to my highlights where I mix a bit of 50-50 Calgar with McGregor, 50-50 this way, and I end up with intermediates. So I end up putting more down if I'm trying to get a nice blend, right? But for most practical purposes, a mid colour, whatever the colour is, a mid, a high, and a deeper colour, and there you go, off you go, whatever you're doing, because it's important to learn the principles rather than just recipes. Yeah, you can go and have a look in your paints and go, oh, this and that, a little bit deeper, a little bit lighter, but that they're all on the same kind of range. So one of the other things is that I'm going to use Fenrisian because it really shows up on the camera. One of the other things is that when you're playing with watered down paint, get it a little bit more watered down. Okay, really thin that. Okay, that's good. Now, do you see what happened? I went down. This is a really cool way to do highlights. Okay, so if you highlight in a highlight almost, so that's dried up really quite nicely. It's a really good example. When I went down with the brush stroke at the end, there's a little droplet, and when I pull my brush off the board, yeah, it leaves a little drop. You'll have noticed that. Anybody who knows this stuff, I apologize. This isn't how-to stuff. It's just things about paint and water and all that. There's a little droplet and it's stronger there. You see it? And we can use that property of painting to, if I wanted the strength here, say in the middle of a piece of armor, the classic one is, say I'm doing a Calgar highlight on a shoulder pad of a Space Marine, and you want it stronger, the highlight stronger at the top, because maybe that's where you want your light source coming from, the top. So if I wanted you see the droplets of water there, yeah, look, whenever I bring my brush off, that's where they are, and you can push them to where you want them to be and let them dry there, and it's stronger. I was just drawing a little arrow, but because I've got my water, I've got it so watered down that I've got droplets. So if I want it stronger there, what do I need to do? I need to take my brush off at that point. Okay. I read a fantastic article by a Spanish painter once. Gosh, it was ages ago, and it was a Golden Demon entry, and the article who talked about like chasing these droplets to get these smooth. Now what you can do is, if I start here now, put stop there, it gets stronger. If I start further there, it gets stronger. If I stop there, it gets strong. Yeah, and I can push that around and leave it where I want it strongest, and you get a fade. With the highlight being the strongest there. Now it might be a bit thin down that, but I can always go back. Okay, and that's how you can get a fade going across, say, or over your Space Marine armor. Now, a model, you can turn it round, guys, because it's easier to paint from top to bottom, okay, to get straight lines. So if I come down, chase there, leave it there, leave the droplet there, okay. And what that would be is, say, on a Space Marine armor, round the curve, and you're highlighting, you're leaving the highlight where you're at. I've not done anything with the paint, I've not gone higher. Just move that a sec. See, I can move that droplet there, and you start to get that fade. Now what I would probably do is add a little bit of white and put that in there, yeah, strengthen it up. We can make that fade a little bit even more. Okay, see the fade now. I've not changed the paint, I've not changed the consistency, I've just changed how I've applied it and where I've left that little droplet of paint, because all along the stroke it's just leaving this really watered down stuff, thinner, and then at the end it leaves a little droplet. Now if I added white to here and maybe went down Macragge blue, which we can do, I think there's some paint there, I'm just gonna, a little bit thin. But if I went and glazed there, oh, remember, I want the deeper end at that end. So I go, you want the droplet to end where you want it the deepest this time, not the highest. Okay. And that starts to get a fade on it. And if, like I say, I went white, added a little bit of white and put a dot there or a little thing there, it would really show up, wouldn't it? I can just go over that again. Stronger at this end. That's like a glaze. Okay, I get a fade to the highlight. Okay, so that's me playing around with paint and all sorts of things. And obviously nothing's 100% perfect. But what I will say is, you know, painting lines, base coat only as much as you need to in terms of get that smoothness through learning consistency, rather than if you want to get your speed up, learn the right consistency for the application, and then you're only doing it once. Sure, most of the time you're going to put a second coat in, or maybe not even a second coat everywhere. That's another trick, or not another trick, but another thing like we did here. You can see the stronger in that middle where we went over second time. Yeah. Chase the dot if you want to play with kind of a glaze type way of dropping a highlight, a fade in. Hope that's useful. Rambled for a long time. Take care. Thanks for tuning in. If you made it to the end of the video, I congratulate you, and it's only people who made it to the end, unless you skipped, would have heard me congratulate you.